Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com. Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the Nonprofit Learning Lab for today's workshop.
Welcome, everyone, to the Community IT Innovators webinar. And we're going to be talking about creating value by designing an IT roadmap for your nonprofit. My name is Carolyn Woodard. I'm the Outreach Director for Community IT, and I'll be the moderator today. So I'm very happy to be here today with Johan, who's going to help us think through it. So Johan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. And my thanks to the Nonprofit Learning Lab for hosting this webinar today. We're really excited to be presenting on this topic. I'm the CEO at Community IT. I've been with the company for over 20 years. Actually started on the technical side and worked directly with a lot of nonprofit organizations in helping them to use technology more effectively. I moved into management about 15 years ago and became the CEO of Community IT in 2015.
So now we're going to go to talk about allocating budget, time, and staff energy. So as a nonprofit, you have three really precious resources: your money, your time, and the staff tolerance and ability to absorb change. So kind of your emotional energy. So we're going to talk about your budget and your budget process in a minute. But I wanted to make sure to mention, as I said, leadership responsibility to help staff carve out the time that is needed for change. So are you taking something off of their plate so they can do the projects on the roadmap? How often do they tell you that they need to meet so that it all gets done? And are you as a leader setting a good example for prioritizing time and budget for these changes? So those are all things to think about as we go forward and talk about this. But now we're going to do another poll just to get a feel for how you're doing your budgeting. I'm going to go ahead and read these options now. When you see the poll, they'll be abbreviated. So your first option is finance. Someone in the finance department takes the amount from last year that you spent on IT and increases it. Second option is your leadership meets with all the stakeholders, and together you review your roadmap, your strategic plan, and make the changes and allocate the budget to it that way. Three, your option is when something breaks, we fix it. When someone needs a new tool, their department approves it. The fourth option is we have outsourced IT and they charge us for every little thing. So kind of a situation where you don't totally know what your budget is going to be and what the strategic plan is. Or five, other or not applicable. I want to make sure to clarify, like some outsourced IT does a situation where they don't tell you exactly what you're paying for. That is not the way that Community IT operates. We have very transparent communication with our clients, and we work on strategic plans with them. In fact, that's where a lot of this presentation is coming from today. But some outsourced IT sometimes do that. Okay, it looks like a lot of people have voted. So if we want to go ahead and close the poll, Johan, can you read the results?
Yeah. So 20% of attendees, their finance department takes last year's budget and increases it slightly. 25% have a roadmap review by leadership and stakeholders. 29%, 30% are taking a break-fix approach where every department selects its own IT. 10% have outsourced IT, and 20% are using it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. So you can see there's a variety. And as I said earlier, nonprofits they just have a variety of how they approach this. So, all right. So Johan, I think you wanted to talk more about budgeting in these categories.
Yeah. And this comes with a big caveat, which is, one of the things I've learned over the years, having worked with hundreds of nonprofit organizations, is that there are a lot of different approaches to budgeting. A lot of different ways to structure and organize a budget, a lot of different budgeting processes, as we just saw on the previous poll. So this is by no means, this is not meant to be prescriptive. At the end of the day, the budget categories that work best are the ones that are sort of fit into the approach that your organization is already taking to budgeting. But this is intended to sort of be a way of translating, a way of broadly categorizing the things you need to think about budgeting for in your IT, and then that can get translated into the specific format that your organization uses for budgeting. And those 4 categories are personnel, hardware, software, and services. And in fact, the third one is probably one that becoming less and less relevant, I guess, or it's merging with services. Those last 2 are really kind of merging together. But personnel are the people, who's going to be responsible for IT for the organization. And, depending on the size of the organization, that might be an in-house team. It might be a hybrid team involving some in-house and some outsourced IT support, or it may be an outsourced third-party IT support provider. So making sure that you are accounting for those costs in the budget is important. And as Carolyn mentioned earlier, if you have, it's helpful to kind of distinguish between ongoing support costs, like what is required to maintain the status quo, provide routine maintenance on the systems, and respond to, incidents and support requests as they come up, and then what's going to be needed for doing some of the major projects and initiatives on top of the ongoing support that's being provided. So it's really helpful to distinguish between those 2.
I really love that, you have to do your budget at least annually. And so if you're a little bit worried about, creating an IT roadmap or what IT entails, like the fact that you can kind of bundle it into budgeting, I think can make it easier for people, because as you said earlier, if you know that you have to replace your laptops, a third of them every year, then that's just a budget item that you can put in very easily. But I want to make sure that we get to the issues of change management and the capacity of your nonprofit for change. So I know, Johan, we had a couple, these are kind of our categories that nonprofits that are in these sizes of staff and maturity tend to have similar issues and similar approaches. So if we wanted to talk a little bit about the capacity for change for nonprofits.
Yeah. And these categories are not, there are always exceptions. Like, these are sort of generalizations, and your organization may have 15 staff and have been around for 30 years. Or your organization, we work with an organization that's about a year old and has 75 staff. So it varies, but just kind of thinking broadly about like these different size and age categories can be helpful because new organizations can move more quickly. Change management is often easier at smaller organizations because everybody can just get in a room and say how they feel, and you can, in some ways it's easier because you can also just kind of tailor what you're doing to each individual person in the organization. Like you know everybody, you know their names off the top of your head, and you can just think specifically about how do we need to manage this new security training solution for this particular person. And that no longer becomes possible as you start to get above the 15-person sized organization, certainly as you get into the 50-60 range. Then you start needing to be more cautious in how you deliver new IT solutions and in how you manage IT solutions. And so there's a management requirement that starts to grow with organizations of that size, and that's important to keep in mind with your budgeting. So if you're a growing organization, you want to make sure that you include that personnel budget for management, because once you get to that size, IT isn't just going to run on its own. Someone needs to manage like all of the different parts that go into IT being successful. And then when you get up into the mid-market range, when you have over 100 staff or you're a more mature organization, you have more departments, more stakeholders. then having a more formal change management approach becomes really necessary. And the documentation requirements become more strict at that level, and organizations of that size probably have more formal change management, change request processes for making changes to the system. So understanding your organization, its capacity for change, and how it handles change in non-IT arenas should help influence and inform how you think about implementing an IT roadmap and the change that goes with that in the IT arena.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We have some more change management resources on our website as well, but I think, change management for anything is change management, and there are a lot of resources out there. I think sometimes people have like a mental block when it's IT, often because people have had maybe a bad experience in the past with an IT project that didn't go very well, or that where the stakeholders weren't really involved, or it was solving a problem that didn't exist, or some sort of thing like that. So, but if you can kind of clear that barrier and just think about an IT project is just like any other project, and then approach the change management in a similar way, that can really help. But so I think we want to make sure that we get to, so when we looked at the spreadsheet that we looked at earlier with the IT roadmap, or you put in, what the project was, what it was going to do, and its urgency, and the impact that it was going to have. There was something missing from that, of course, which was like, how are you actually going to do this? When are you going to undertake the things that you're going to do? So I think, Johan, you're going to talk a little bit more about how to build out a timeline from that IT roadmap.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to those questions of urgency, complexity, and impact, and then matching that up with other things that might be going on in the coming year for your organization. And then, this is just a sample kind of graphical representation of what a timeline might look like. So you basically take the recommendations, the initiatives that came out of the assessment that have now been prioritized and scheduled, and you represent that, in some kind of a timeline. So it's easy to communicate to other stakeholders in the organization when these different things are going to happen. So for example, in this sample, upgrading the networking equipment at the Washington, D.C. office has been identified as both something that's urgent, not major impact on the staff, and so that was scheduled to happen first. And then the security initiatives were determined to be, the next highest priority. Those are going to have a higher impact on staff. So the password manager was scheduled for the end of the year, but the other security initiatives and the completion of the password manager initiatives, those were pushed into the first quarter of the following year, because a lot of organizations are very busy at the end of the year, closing out their books, sending out final appeals for fundraising. People are getting ready to go away for the holidays. And so you'll notice that in that Q4 column, there's only one initiative. And it could be that the work that's being done at that point is mostly happening in the IT department, and then it's being delivered to the rest of the organization in the first quarter of the following year. And then there's a lot of back office items that weren't as critical, as some of the other items, like decommissioning the equipment in your data center, for example. Like maybe you're not using that equipment anymore. Depending on the lease at your data center, that may be a high priority item, or we're in the middle of a 2-year lease. All right, well, the equipment's not hurting anybody. We can kind of save that for when we have more time to work on it. So putting the timeline together in that way helps to line up your initiatives with the prioritization that you developed in the earlier part of the process.
I love it. I have a little quibble because I see that the policy issues were moved to be later. And I think for a lot of organizations, like for starters, if you don't have a policy or your policies haven't been updated in a while, like especially if they haven't been updated since you went to remote work or hybrid work, those are definitely, I wouldn't say they're as urgent as maybe some of the security things, but having the policies and making sure that everyone like is on board with them and understands why you have policies and what the policies are is really crucial and that can be a good exercise to get leadership really thinking about the rest of your strategy as well. So if you're pulling a group together, a committee, to make sure that your policies are up to date, it can help them start thinking about like, well, what is the bring your own device policy and why is it that way? And, other issues around acceptable use when people are working from home. So that can be something that you can use to kind of help jumpstart the process itself.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Carolyn, because theoretically, like, if you were doing this in an ideal world, the policy would come first because the policy should drive everything else. Well, strategy comes first and then policy. And then once the policy is in place, that really helps define what technology solutions you should be implementing. I think one of the challenges, though, with policy is that it often requires the executives to make decisions, like approving the policy. And so now it's as crucial as policy is, and as primary as it is to the process, there are certain dependencies around policy that don't always exist with some of the other initiatives. So,
exactly.
I would say, it can take longer. Maybe like in this case, it should be like 3 quarters. The policy work is going to happen over 3 quarters. One quarter to put the policy together, and 2 quarters to convince the C-suite to approve it.
Exactly. But yeah, I think, making sure that you have policy. And I think, recently, I think we've been seeing a lot with the cybersecurity insurance, that has been helping nonprofits of all sizes see where they have policy gaps and where they have to upgrade certain security issues, to be able to meet those insurance requirements. Otherwise, they can't get the insurance. So like if they don't have the multi-factor authentication on everybody's accounts, and then they look at it and they're like, oh, we don't even know all of the accounts that people have. Like maybe they've been offboarding staff and they never, deleted those accounts. So it can help spur organizations. It can be another kind of external reason that you can use to convince people that they have to undertake this work to pull the strategy together.
Yeah, totally agree. That's a great point.
Okay, well, let's get to remind everyone of our learning objectives for this presentation. We wanted to help people understand how to set priorities and not be, afraid of setting priorities, and just, you probably already know what's going on with IT at your organization, even if you don't know that you know it. So sitting down, making that list, doing it in Word if you need to, and then sitting around and figuring out those priorities, and then how to start designing the IT roadmap from your priorities. Put it in a spreadsheet, assign those the urgency, the impact that it's going to have. Think hard about allocating your budget. Maybe use your budget process to help jumpstart making an IT strategy, making sure that you prioritize the time that your staff are going to need to use to put in to build the strategy, and also for any projects that come out of that strategy that then you want to implement. Your staff energy, emotional energy, and time and change management issues around understanding the change management and capacity of your nonprofit and your staff. And then we just covered project timelines and planning steps. So how to start actualizing, going from that list that you had of what you want to do, and then assigning it to the quarters, figuring out like when is the gala, so everyone is going to be preoccupied with that. So we don't want to roll something out right in front of, right when we're having a gala or a report or some other initiative that is organization-wide. So So that's what we had for the learning objectives. And I think, Johan, thank you so much. I think we really hit on a lot of them. So now I want to open it up to questions. And I think we did have a question in chat. Monica, did you want to read that?
Yes, thank you, Carolyn and Johan. It's referring to that sample timeline that you shared in a couple of slides ago, but they were wondering, what did you use to create it? Was it Excel? And they just said it was very clear and easy to read.
This, I think, was created, don't quote me on this, I think it was in Lucidchart. So that's a online, it's kind of like you can make diagrams and other sort of visual business documents in Lucidchart, and they have a ton of templates that you can use. So I think this could have been created, it certainly looks like it could have been created in Excel. You could certainly create this in Excel. I think it may have been created in Lucidchart using a template.
Yeah, no, I think you could definitely do it in a spreadsheet. If you wanted to just take that, the spreadsheet that you came up with your roadmap to begin with, where we put in the urgency and the impact, you could, build that out as well with who is the point person for the different, those different tasks. And then you could build out when you were planning for that to happen as well. So there's lots of different ways to do it. But yeah, I think this is a really good visual. For those of you who are listening, we will have this visual in our transcript on our website, and I think it'll be in the video on the Nonprofit Learning Labs website as well.
Great, thank you. It looks like we have a couple more questions. Someone was wondering, they said we have a very small organization and we don't prioritize designing our website and managing it. Would you recommend getting a website consultant?
Well, Carolyn handles our website, so I was wondering, Carolyn, if you want to answer
this. Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, because a website is technically IT, but it usually falls more in marketing, sometimes under the development department as well. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that if you have stakeholders that are feeling like they don't have the technical skills or just for whatever reason have a barrier to prioritizing it, yeah, there are a bunch of consultants out there. There are website organizations that build websites that are focused really on nonprofits. So yeah, I would recommend, sometimes also with a barrier like that, it can be helpful to bring in an outsider. And if you got someone who did an assessment of your existing website and was able to present to the people at your organization the ways it could be better, sometimes that can help people kind of kickstart at wanting to make an update.
And I would just add, I think one thing to think about is the functionality of the website. So very simple websites that are just presenting information about your organization are going to be pretty inexpensive to create. Yeah. Websites where you're maybe providing information, where you're delivering program through the website or member services, those are going to start to get more complex and much more expensive. So starting off with that sort of understanding of what's the function of the website, I think will help to guide you towards, if it's a more advanced need, even if you're a small organization, then you might need a firm. And if it's just providing information, then an independent consultant might be sufficient.
Mm-hmm. I think also, again, with leadership and prioritization, if you have someone in your organization that's responsible for the website, but they're not getting the time that they need to be able to keep it up to date, that might be a different issue. And then the last thing I'll say is that there's a lot of security around websites as well. So you don't want your website to be hacked or taken over with ransomware. So that's another reason maybe to go to an expert to make sure that your site is secure.
Great.
Was there another question?
There was. I think this will be our final question. Someone was wondering, what kind of education and/or resources would you suggest for nonprofits providing their staff to avoid cybersecurity incidents?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I'm doing the website for Community IT. We have a bunch of free webinars and other articles and tips and other resources, links to other resources as well that can help you out. And Johan, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to pull it up, but I will share it with a Nonprofit Learning Lab. Matt just recently mentioned as well the national website around cybersecurity for small businesses that has a ton of free resources as well.
The website for National Free Resources for Cybersecurity for Small Businesses, which is also very useful to nonprofits, is staysafeonline.org. All spelled out, one word, staysafeonline.org.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of resources online. I mean, we did a webinar a year or two ago about developing a cybersecurity training curriculum. So you could go to our site and check out that webinar. TechSoup has put a lot of focus on cybersecurity. They have paid training courses, not for staff, but for like someone who's developing training for their staff. And then there's also solutions. We typically recommend KnowBe4, which started off as a fake spear phishing solution. So you could kind of check on how likely it is that your staff would click on a phishing, email. But they've really expanded into providing almost like a security learning management system where they also have like trainings that they keep updated that you can assign to staff and manage. So, and there are other solutions in addition to KnowBe4 that provide that as well. We consider to be a pretty reasonable fee, because at the end of the day, like the biggest threat to most organizations as far as security goes are the staff. You're probably not going to have like hackers trying to hack into your computers. You're going to have criminals trying to steal money from your organization.
Going to trick your staff into clicking on something. Exactly.
Thank you, Carolyn and Johan. This workshop has come to a close. Thank you so much for participating. And again, thank you, Carolyn and Johan, for educating our community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.